Reverb. Reverb is absolutely one of the best effects in the world. Probably my favorite. And there are different kinds of reverb. There's this kind of reverb. There's this kind of reverb. This, and this. As I see it, there's really 5 different types of reverbs that we all need to know about. Non-linear notwithstanding, you could make a case to put it on the list, but we're going to leave it off for now. And those 5 types are as follows. There's room, hall, plate, spring, and shimmer / ambient. Really, ambient and shimmer is like a subset, but honorable mention in that category too. So briefly touching on what are these different reverbs before we jump on the computer and hear some actual audio examples. A room is pretty simple. It's, well, a lot like what I'm sitting in right now. Think of a bedroom in your house. It's a room with 4 walls, and it's really made to be lived in. It's not really made to be a space where you record music or, so when you use some of that, it captures kind of an intimate setting and a vibe that feels real. Halls are kind of the opposite. They're very grandiose facilities where orchestras and big concerts happen, and so they're made to sound huge, and it's the sound just traveling through and filling up that whole space. They sound absolutely huge, wonderful, and fantastic on most things. If you're trying to get something that sounds close, intimate, skip the hall. Plate reverbs are kind of funny. I have no idea how they ended up coming up with them, but simply put, imagine taking a sheet of metal or something, not too thick, more on the thinner side, and just suspending it on kind of like a wooden frame. And if you were to bang it, not too hard, but just kind of tap it, and then put your ear next to it as it's ringing. Well, that's a lot like what the reverb sounds like. It's a little bit more complicated as to how the sound is traveling through it and all that, but suffice it to say that the sound of this metal plate is really what gives it its distinct characteristics, and it sounds kind of a little bit lo-fi, a little bit vibey, kind of 70s. So if you're looking for that lo-fi and not clean and crisp kind of sound, plate could be the way to go. And then of course there's spring reverbs. That's kind of the classic reverb that everybody knows, because usually your first guitar amp, if it has a built-in reverb, the reverb that's on there is spring reverb. Think of like a Fender twin reverb, right? So the reverb that's in that thing is spring reverb. And what better example to think of spring reverb than something like the old classic 60s song Pipeline. And surfer rock in general, that... Okay, so maybe that doesn't sound great, but you get the idea. That spring reverb, it's very spongy and kind of wet to sounding, and honestly, I don't like it. It's not for me. Actually, I hate it, but there's a time and a place for it, and some people swear by it. And then there's my favorite reverb of all these types, the 5th kind, which is ambient reverbs, shimmer reverbs. You can make a case that you can make a hall reverb. If you were to put some modulation on that hall, you could make that an ambient reverb. That's absolutely the case, because ambient is more so about texture and size and decay and how long something travels and how big and huge it sounds. And you could definitely make a hall into an ambient reverb that way. But then there's like shimmer reverbs, and to be honest, I'm not exactly sure how that mechanism really works. It's a little bit above my head on a technical level, so you'll have to ask a programmer how that works. But in my limited basic understanding, it is taking the output of a certain kind of reverb and feeding it back in so that those artifacts kind of start to build up and create this feedback loop, and the resulting sounds are what we would call a shimmer. And those can be on the high frequency side, or it can be lower frequency, or anywhere in between. My personal favorite reverb, which we're going to jump in and take a look at, is Valhalla Shimmer. It is one plugin that just generates instant, huge, beautiful, lush, cinematic textures in one freaking plugin. It's just so awesome. So yeah, we're going to take a look at these different reverbs and how they sound. And by the time this is done, you're going to be buying Bauhaus and you're welcome. So why don't we, without further ado, let's jump in and let's take a look at it. Okay, friend. So what I've prepared here is some audio examples where we're going to demonstrate what all these different reverbs sound like on some different sources. So I have 4 different instruments. I have the sound of an upright piano. This is a sample of strings, and I tried to use a nice assortment of strings there. So it's a combination of some violins and some cellos, like a section of both. And here's an electric guitar right here, and then an acoustic guitar. And basically what we're playing is just something extremely simple, just a chord progression of literally 2 chords, C and G. It's in the key of G, and they're chords that are just held out and sustained for the, well, I didn't really sync the tempo with the tempo that I played it at because it doesn't really matter, but I'll just let you hear it. Okay, so that sounds good. Nice and dry. Yeah, so it's played that way so that we can hear the effects of the reverb actually carrying out. Same chords, just different instruments, so I'll let you hear this. So maybe not perfectly timed, but it sure does sound pretty, doesn't it? Electric guitar. This is my Gretsch hollow body guitar on the bridge pickup. Okay, and that is with like a Fender Twin Reverb amp, modeling it anyway. And then acoustic guitar with just a touch of, I learned this from Joe Gilder over at Home Studio Corner, this tip called butter compression, which we could probably talk about another day, but the idea is the threshold is the point at which, I'm probably butchering the technical explanation of it, but just so bear with me. But threshold is, of course, the setting at which you're telling the compressor when to kick in and start compressing. Well, if you take this threshold and you lower it all the way to the bottom, you're basically saying, I want you to be compressing anytime there's any sound level at all, period. If there's anything detectable, compression is happening. So what you do is you take your ratio, and the ratio is telling the compressor by how much to compress. So anytime you're exceeding the threshold, wherever it's set, you're going to say, I want you to compress this amount of dBs, or decibels, for every decibel that has crossed the threshold, right? So 1-to-1 would mean for every decibel that crosses the threshold, compress by 1. So essentially that's nothing. That's no compression happening at all. But if you are compressing all the time with the threshold lowered all the way, and you steadily bring the ratio up, what's happening is you're getting compression happening all the time, but because you're putting the ratio setting at a lower setting, the amount of compression that's happening is still pretty low and pretty minimal, so it doesn't sound too heavy. So it sounds different than if I were to take this threshold and set it to the point at which I'm getting 2 or 3 or 4 dBs of compression. This is a different way to approach it. You're still going to set it so that your gain reduction will play it without the compressor. Okay. Now, with the compressor, you're going to see the gain reduction happening here visually. Okay, so it's almost like the attack of that pick is popping out a little more because of the compression. It's kicking in at the front end of this transient where there's wherever it spikes the most, really kind of hearing it poke out more. It's also kind of sustaining more. It's just a different sound. He calls it butter compression because it sounds nice and smooth and not like compression normally would sound on acoustic guitar. Once you start to process it too much, it's very delicate. But I digress. So we've heard all of our instruments. The approach that we're going to be taking to demonstrate this reverb is rather than take the reverb effect, like this is a stock reverb, and put it on each individual track and play with the settings, we're going to be using sends. So an effect send is where you have these different tracks over here. They're not tracks, actually. That's not. It's a send is really the only term that's used to describe it. So what we're going to do is each one of these has, you can see A, B, C, D, E. When I turn this up, I am sending a copy of the audio of this track to the return track that I'm labeled here. And so, for example, A is I've set up with the room reverb, this classic room. So the purpose of this, really, the reason why this is a good idea, and there are definitely instances in which using the reverb plugin or whatever plugin you want to use on the individual track is a good idea if you want to affect the original signal. But the reason why this is a good idea in this case is we're taking this track and we're preserving the original copy of it here. And so we're going to have this original copy that's unprocessed. And by sending a copy of it over here, we're essentially going to take a very processed, which whenever you have a send track, especially with reverbs and delays, always put that mix up 100%, all the way up, because the amount of mix that we're going to be using to dictate the mix between the processed affected signal and the original dry signal is going to be controlled by this knob, not by this one. If you had this as an insert on the track itself, then we would be using this, right? So this just gives us the opportunity to preserve the original copy so that they can be processed side by side, and you're balancing the dry and the process together. That is what a mix knob is too, but what's cool about this is really efficient, because if you notice here, every single one of these tracks has the ability to send signal to any one of these sends. So I could be sending these three instruments. I could send all of them to the same room reverb send track here, or the return, the aux track, we'll call it. And this just from a processing standpoint, that saves your computer a lot of processing power, because you're not having to deal with several instances of the same plugin on all these different tracks. You've got one plugin that's able to affect and deal with multiple instruments or groups of instruments or whatever you want, all through one send track. So it's really nice. So anyway, now that we kind of understand that a little bit, let's just start to hear it. So the room, this is made to model a smaller space, so it's going to be more subtle. I'll just start to blend it in. Let's get our loop going here. And I can control it over here too. It's just smaller. It's subtle. It doesn't sound very big, especially because the decay time is relatively low. So, and this piano sound already kind of sounds like it's in a small room, because when you mic a piano, there's just going to be some artifacts from the room in it, even if it's directly up against the piano. So you sort of have to crank it to really start to hear it. But watch this. We'll play with the decay time, make the room a little bigger. Yeah, I'm hearing it. Usually with rooms, once you start getting to a larger room territory, it's almost like you might want to switch over to our next reverb, which is the hall. Let's hear what that sounds like. So we're going to turn this down and let's go to that. We can solo this return track too. Let's turn it off without it. Okay. So you can see that it sounds like it's in a bigger space, like kind of like a concert hall. I will say when you use the plugin, I'll show you, as an insert on the track itself, you tend to hear it more directly versus when it's on a send. It kind of, the amount of signal that's on, because it's an independent track, the amount of actual level that you're seeing on this meter is less than what's on the original, so it tends to be quieter versus on the original. Watch this. So there's a slight difference there. Nevertheless, let's keep chugging right along. Let's go to our plate. Our plate reverb is, being passed through a metal plate, and just has a different sound all unto itself. So let's hear what that sounds like. Let's solo it. Because the mix is all the way up on this insert track, it's going to be a little bit delayed, like pre-delay. Let's allow more high frequency here. There, you can hear it. It's just kind of got a unique sound. I wouldn't use it on everything, but sometimes it can be kind of a different kind of vibe. So let's go over to our spring. I hate spring reverb. I never use it, but we're going to show you what it sounds like so you can decide for yourself. Let's hear it by itself. It's funny. I don't think I've ever heard piano with spring reverb until now. Let's make it bigger. Oh. Okay. I could see that being useful for certain intentional production tricks. If you're wanting to go for something kind of weird or different, or a moment, that's different on piano. I just hate it on guitar, which is where it's traditionally used. And now for my favorite, the star of the show, Valhalla Shimmer. What a great plugin. Let's go for it. Oh. Beautiful thing about this is you can turn the shimmery sound off. And now you're just left with this beautiful ambient wash. Oh man, let's make it bigger. Oh, that's so nice. It's 2 chords and it just sounds like you're being transported to a different dimension. Oh, it's so good. That's why I love that plugin so much. Let's go over to our strings and see what we can come up with demoing out these reverbs. I'm going to go a little faster this time so that we can cover each of these. Let's go. Oh. Oops. Still on my piano. Let's get our strings going here. Nope, did not mean to cut it. Hang on, my computer's processing. Okay, sorry about that. Out. So that's subtle. It just makes it sound a little wider. As soon as it dies out, listen. Ah, yeah, see that little tail at the end there? It almost reminds me, because it's like strings and it sounds just orchestral and kind of fancy, it reminds me of like 18th century, like being in some rich British person's estate in like one of their large living rooms and hearing like a group of people playing strings in there or something like that. All right, moving on. Let's get some Hall. This is where it's going to shine. That's nice. A little more. Ah, see that sound just carrying out. So nice. Plate's unusual in strings, not gonna lie, but we're gonna try it. That's not bad. That's not bad. I'm not quite sure what I think about it. I don't know if I wouldn't use it in anything where I'm trying to be like traditional. But I'm not necessarily a traditional composer. Speaking of not being traditional, spring reverb on strings, this is blasphemy, but let's do it anyway. Whew, that is not good. But we're trying things. All right. Shimma, shimma, shimma. Okay. We need to make it smaller. This shift controls the number of semitones that is being affected with the shimmer. The feedback is controlling the amount of shimmer, and the notes that you're getting in the shimmer is controlled by this shift. Sets the amount of pitch shift in semitones. Use right mouse button to change non-behavior. I'm not going to get into that. Whatever's default's fine. 12 means you're going one octave up perfectly. And then that would mean 6 is no octaves up at all. Which gets messy. Negative 12. Hear that low frequency stuff happening? Oh. It's like resonating and vibrating like it's an earthquake. Not an earthquake, but it's just like shaking the earth. Amazing. There's so many. These controls, there's an infinite number of combinations that you can use to control them. It's outrageous. I'm not even a salesman for this company, but I love it. Okay, moving on. Electric guitar. I was still soloed out. You'll really hear it on electric guitar because it's so dry. Yeah. Nice, subtle, but pretty sounding room. Of course, they always model these room plugins and all this kind of stuff off of like nice sounding studio rooms as opposed to, it's in the name, studio reverb, as opposed to the sort of room that you'd be getting in a bedroom in a house that wasn't created to be a place to record music. So, moving on. Let me show you something funny about hall reverbs on guitar. If I crank this thing up, we're almost going to get almost a shimmer-esque. You start to hear these harmonic sounds. Which is pretty cool. I would say use that sparingly, especially if you're playing music that isn't slow. Like, you got to be playing. This chord progression is even too fast to appreciate the speed at which, just the amount of decay that's happening there. The next chord is being struck. It's being strummed out before the reverb has had a chance to kind of swell down. You know what I mean? And so it just creates a little bit of a sonic blurriness and a messiness that's not necessarily in a good way, complimentary way. Plate's great on guitar. Let's hear it. Let's darken it up a bit. Those are some borderline like spacey UFO-y kind of sounds. Borderline. Don't get too carried away. Spring. This is where electric guitar should shine, but I still hate it, but let's hear it anyway. Let me play with the setting here really quick. Okay, sorry about that. I was just changing my bit rate so that my computer would have more time to process these effects. For being a spring reverb, I don't totally hate that because it doesn't sound like the typical Fender spring reverb that's just so like spongy and just bad. All right, this is gonna be great. Without shimmer. Just creates this undercurrent of swirling ambient character. Less. Even with the diffusion lower, it still creates like a little tail of sauciness that follows it, which is cool. That's good timing because as soon as that last little bit dies out, the next chord hits. You see that? So that's cool. That's the kind of stuff you can play with. And obviously, I haven't done this ahead of time. I'm literally doing it with you in real time. So I'm just going with my gut kind of thing. And feel free to try this out on your own. In fact, please do. And acoustic guitar, finally. It's going to respond quite well to the room, I think. Sounds nice. Perhaps that room's a bit bright. Pretty straightforward. I think you get how that works. Let's move on to some Hall. Where's my Hall at? Sounds cool if you want that sound to just carry out a little bit longer. I'm fond of that. Not in every application, you know, a singer-songwriter type song. Probably not. Sounds a little too far. Plate. Subtle in a way. A little brighter. I don't hate it. I mean, it sounds fine. It just doesn't sound, for some reason, this plate reverb on acoustic, it just doesn't sound like that different than Room does to me. It could be that this plate plugin is just more subtle. Or it's just me. I don't know. Let's hear that again. Okay. Room. Okay, I guess there's a bit of kind of happening. A bit of a wobbliness. Sounds a little less natural, I suppose. Spring. That sounds very metallic, doesn't it? Spring. I mean, it's in the name, spring, but it is kind of springy. Now for the golden child. Dual. Oh, okay. Hear that low? Feels like a rumble almost. Now there's a way to get some cinematic effects going, because when you do dual, you're getting a full octave down and a full octave up from wherever your shift is set, if I understand it correctly. I'm pretty sure I do. So yeah, that pretty much kind of covers it. Acoustic with shimmer. Didn't think about that, did you? So there you have it, guys. There's how I see it. The 5 basic types of reverb, and there's other kinds of reverb that are sort of subsets of these main types. I kind of created ambient reverb to be a category of its own, when really its invention was probably people who were experimenting with halls and some of these other things and put it all together and fed it into itself, and then it creates this feedback loop like this. But now it is its own category of reverb, and I think that it produces these gorgeous textures. So you see why I love ambient reverb. But all these other reverbs are useful too, with all these different types of instruments. So I hope that was helpful. And I want to ask you this. Why don't you go ahead and drop me a comment down below here underneath the video. Tell me what you think about this. What's your favorite kind of reverb? I'd like to know. And yeah, tell me a little bit about how you use reverb, what your favorite kind of reverb is and why. And if there's anything else that you'd like to know about how I use reverb, or even just in general, go ahead and let me know what you think about this, or if there's any other stuff that you'd like to hear me talk about, because I want to make sure that if I'm going to take the time to sit and do a video and demonstrate some of this stuff, that you guys are hearing about stuff that matters to you, that's important to you, because otherwise, what's the point? I'm just kind of talking to myself, and even though I do that sometimes, I don't need to spend time producing a video to do that. I want to make sure that this is relevant to you. So go ahead and do that. Otherwise, also, I've got a little gift for you if you want to hop on my email list. There's a link in the video for that, and I'll send you some samples and a free workshop I put together where I use those samples to write a song, so you can get a nice look at how that works. And that's some pretty helpful training that I just give to you as just a free little gift, just because. So thanks, guys, and until next time, I will catch you then.